The first use case you think about blockchain is payments, right? So that's the first thing you want to do, is show that you can secure a payment mechanism just like Visa, MasterCard, but much more secure, without middlemen, take away the fees, offers economies of scale. So the more people use it, the cheaper it gets. The way we view the future of value in the long term, 3 to 5 to 10 years, we view layer 1 blockchains will essentially become like the new republics. These will be the new mechanisms where all the value is going to proliferate to. In the future, there will be the layer 1 blockchain, there will be the mining market, there'll be the dApps, and there'll be tokens. So the lower you get in the stack, the lower risk you have, but the lower rewards. The highest risk reward will be on the layer 1 blockchain, because that's where all the value will flow up. But it's highest value, highest risk. We view layer 1 blockchains, which is Bitcoin, Syscoin, Ethereum, as court systems. They need to be combative to the external forces that we don't control, even in the software world. In the real world, like inflation, hyperinflation, wars, these systems need to be secure from that. And this is why we view Bitcoin as the gold standard for security and decentralization. What else does the world need? What else does the world cherish when you have something like Bitcoin? How can we extend that to something else where we can take advantage to build real world utility? This is where Ethereum comes in. For me, Ethereum is a gold standard for flexibility or general computation. We're trying to stick to the gold standards we know the world's going to cherish and develop on, and we put those two concepts together. And this is what Syscoin is.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I am
that Hotep Jesus dude. That Hotep Jesus dude.
It's your first time here, hit the subscribe button. Welcome. Got some good information for you today, or I should say great information for you today. We have some precedent-breaking information for you today. Shout out to our sponsor, Syscoin. Unfortunately, some inflation news hit the markets today, and everything is tanking. But for savvy investors like us, well, it's a good buy day. I got some notifications today. Said Apple was down 5%, AMD was down 5%, and some other different securities are just down. So today's a good buy day. If you haven't made your monthly purchase into your stock portfolio, today is probably a good day. This is not financial advice. I'm not licensed to give you any financial advice. And Syscoin is a paid sponsor of this channel. With that said, let's dive right into today's presentation. Nope, not that. Here we go. Okay. So, also trending today, Lindsey Graham put out a report, he proposed a bill in regards to abortion. And I'm not going to say anything further on that. I'm just going to allow you to do your own thinking as we work our way through this document. Now, first of all, I'd just like to show you what I'm reading from. I'm reading from this book here. Oh, upside down. Right here. This is Patriot Report. Unmasking the Conspiracy of Money and War. This is by a gentleman of the name of Brian Sharp, Bryan Sharpe. You can find this on Amazon or his website at briansharp.co, Bryan Sharpe. And he's done a fine job documenting some precedents of monetary policy as it pertains to war, etc., throughout U.S. history. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and dive into the document. So, this chapter, today's presentation, is on the Panic of 1819 and Maryland versus McCulloch. Sort of a dual chapter, I guess you can say. So, we're going to breeze through the Panic of 1819. I think it's important to read this chapter, Panic of 1819, so people have some sort of education on how central banks react or don't react or could be to blame for inflation, recessions, etc., etc. So with that being said, let's just dive right into this. Don't want to waste any more time. Shout out to my super chatters. Def Jules is paying her tuition. Thank you, bro. Appreciate you. If anybody would like to support the channel, please do. Super chat is available. Go ahead and hit the button, and I'll read them off at the end and answer any questions. And if you want to support me directly without YouTube taking a cut, it's $ Hotep Jesus on Cash App. Okay, finally, let's get into it. So it says here, historian Andrew Browning describes this event as the first Great Depression. Now, the author here says, I'm questioning whether this was created purposefully or brought about by financial ignorance. The calamity started with the increase in the money supply, as I have already covered and finished with probably in the previous section, and finished with the contraction of the money supply. So we'll explain what this is in a moment here. It says here, the money supply contracted by no less than 47.2% in 1 year. National bank branches called in loans with heavy balances issued to state banks. Bankruptcies, foreclosures, and massive unemployment, amongst other symptoms, ensued, while the value of the currency rapidly declined. What happens during every economic bust happened during this panic. Banks repossessed property at a fraction of its true value, while about 3,500 people were sent to prison for unpaid debt between 1820 and 1822. Public land sales fell from 13.6 million in 1818 to 1.3 million in 1821. That's approximately a 90% crash in prices. The situation became so drastic that some areas returned to the barter system. We have a quote here from William Gog, not sure how to pronounce that. He says, the bank was saved and the people were ruined. And I find that quite interesting because it sounds like the same exact chant from Occupy Wall Street, where he said, banks got bailed out, people got sold out. That was the chant that we would hear at Zuccotti Park in New York City, right down there in Wall Street area, which was a reaction to Wall Street in the 2008 housing crisis. Which I find funny because back then activism was like attacking Wall Street. Now activism is about attacking the rich. It's just like, wait, hold on. You went from very specific to very vague. It went from, hey, Wall Street's the problem, to Trump and MAGA extremists are the problem. So at some point, activism was co-opted, I believe. It says here, branch officers and directors at the Baltimore branch of the central bank approved loans to themselves, which totaled several $1 million, and loopholes were created to embezzle stocks, amongst other financial abuse. I'll allow you guys to speculate on how you can manipulate the system, especially back then, where there weren't as many laws on the books or policies on the books, et cetera, et cetera. And all the citations are here in the book as well, if you guys want to dive into this a little bit deeper. It continues, says, to ease the pain of the panic, there were several ideas and arguments. I can't say I disagree with the following idea, but it's amusing when you understand the causes of the panic were due to actions by the central bank. This idea was a psychological propaganda campaign to appeal to frugality. In his publication, National Advocate, Mordecai Manuel Noah advocated for families to manufacture their own clothing and stop indulging in high fashion. Now, I agree. However, I'm an individual who sometimes does enjoy indulging in high fashion, and not because I like name brand stuff, simply because, well, the quality is just really, really great. I have, as far as white tees are concerned, I have a drawer of white tees that are Hanes, and I paid $25, I guess, for a pack of 5, and several washes, and those things are ruined. Whereas the one white tee I bought, I paid $50 for. Well, it's still it's still in great condition. That t-shirt, it's a higher quality blend of cotton, I guess, or whatever it is, or threading, or however this fashion stuff works. So technically, when you buy high fashion, sometimes you're saving money because, well, I'm going to have to go out and buy another pack. If I buy 3 packs in a year, well, that's $100. And, I could have bought 2 really high quality shirts for that price. But anyway, let's continue. The theme promoted by Noah and others was for the individual to rid themselves of habits of waste and indulgence and replace them with prudence and more practical financial calculation. When you have banksters manipulating the currency and economy, this is more of necessity to survive than an idea. The General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church advocated for a return to religious and moral values. So my suggestion to people is, if you're in a recession, act like you're not. Spend your money acquiring assets, stocks, bonds, whatever it is that you feel is a great investment. And when the economy is doing good, act like you're poor. Hoard the money, stack your bread, and wait for the next dip so that you have money to, and so also so you can survive the dip, right? I think what happens is during the booms, everybody's frivolous. Everybody, thinks that it's never going to end, so much prosperity. And then they don't save enough, and then the depression or recession hits, and now people are panicking. So yeah, you sort of have to flip your mindset during these times. So let's continue. It says, however, Thomas Miller, a Virginia representative of Powhatan County, sounds like Native American, argued that the debtors were not to be blamed for their predicament. He placed the blame on the central bank for their inflationary, then deflationary actions. So we see that today, deflationary action by the Fed could be something like raising interest rates, where they're trying to contract the money supply, shrink it a little bit. Happy Hotep Day, Lauren. What up? What up? What up? Alex Hatch in the building. What's up, Alex? I was thinking about you the other day. I had like a Manna Fly cup around here or something I was drinking out of. All right, let's continue. She's probably here because she saw the picture of Rothbard. The other common arguments centered around stays, minimum appraisal laws, the acceptable forms of payment, and if printing more money would correct the problem. On the subject of stays, the New Jersey General Assembly in 1820, for example, voted on if debt obligations may have postponed executions if the creditor refused to accept the debtor's property at or above minimum appraised value. Then there was the scaling system in Kentucky based upon the value of fiat versus specie. For example, if a debtor had a debt of $100 and had already paid the creditor $50, the debt was considered paid in full by the magistrate because it was assumed that the debt was paid in specie, and specie held double the value of fiat, which I can't really argue with. The final argument I'll include was the argument of who shall receive relief. Some believed, like Senator John Henry Eaton of Tennessee, that speculators should be excluded and only real settlers should be provided with relief. It was believed that the speculators were wealthy and were not significantly hurt by the financial crisis. It was also believed by those who argued against the speculators that it was the speculators who bought the support of the press to push the relief bill. Relief bill. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound relevant to your life today? Let's continue. Like Missouri, During the summer, fall of 1821, the speculators were seen as people who were not interested in acquiring the land, which incurred debt, but were purchasing land on credit in order to sell it at a higher price. Kentucky Representative George Robertson from rural Garrard County also tried to amend a relief bill to exclude the speculators. Both Eaton and Robertson would lose after their respective assembly voted. Others argued that all should receive the benefit of relief. So I just want to explain speculators because I know there's some people on this channel who are very young and don't understand some of this stuff. And basically what's happening is you have basically two types of people that could borrow money from a bank. People who want to buy a house, right? A residential house is going to be owner occupied, means the owner is going to live in it. And and then you have, so it's owner occupied and you have an investment property. So the speculators would be people considered purchasing an investment property. So what they're saying is there were people who were borrowing money, speculating on the real estate market, and actually weren't going to be displaced from their homes and being thrown out in the streets. So, those guys, yeah, they got to pay their debts. But because this was really the fault of the central bank, people who are owner occupied should not be thrown out of their homes, and they should not be forced to pay the debt in full, if at all. Just wanted to put that and explain that a little bit for my younger peeps or my uninformed peeps, which I kind of agree with. If you're out here, speculating, and you're taking a risk. I think it's different when somebody's buying a house to live in, right? Okay, you're not really speculating and you're not trying to flip the house or anything like that. But when you're in the business of investing, you have to take some risk, and some risk that comes along with it is losing money. It's part of the game. So you shouldn't be bailed out because you were speculating. You were gambling. Okay. The Federal Relief Act of 1821 was passed. This bill relieved debtors of some of their obligations in various ways. It extended payment schedules, allowed debtors to return the land back to government, but keep the acreage, which was equivalent to their payments, lowered the price of land purchased before 1820 and more. So basically they said, all right, you don't have to give us back all the land. If you paid, I guess 20% of your loan, you get to keep 20% of the land. Right. So it was somewhat fair, I guess you can say. I don't know. But that is the Relief Act of 1821, and put that in your notebooks for your own homework. So I said I'll stop here on the Panic of 1819 for the sake of brevity. To understand the subject better, I suggest Murray Rothbard, The Panic of 1819, Reactions to Policies. It was the first scholarly book on the topic, and it was the thesis for Rothbard's dissertation according to Mises.org. I do suggest you guys go read that book. I read it. Don't ask me to remember, everything I read in there. Phenomenal book. It'll really give you a great idea of how monetary policy works in America. Okay, so we have Rothbard on the thumbnail, and it's because, well, he was the inspiration for that chapter, and I borrowed a lot, or the author of this book, The Patriot Report, borrowed a lot from him. So let's get into the juicy stuff now, okay? I told you guys on Twitter that, there was a precedent set. And a precedent set that created a massive growth of authority by the federal government and overreach of power over the states, over the United States, okay? So we're going to dive into this. We're going to go at a good pace. So keep up, and when it makes sense, I'll stop and explain things. But as far as case law is concerned, this is something that every United States American citizen needs to know. When it comes to Supreme Court cases, this is one of the cases that you need to know, if not number one. If you don't remember any case law, you have to remember this case, this Supreme Court case. This Supreme Court case is applicable to so many other cases when it comes to Roe v. Wade, et cetera, When it comes to Lindsey Graham's bill today, this case right here sets a precedent, and we're going to dive into that right now. So, Maryland versus McCulloch. Many states banned the central bank outright or taxed it. Maryland's approach was the latter. They took aim at the Maryland branch of the central bank by passing an act which levied a stamp tax on all printed notes. The options were pay the tax to obtain specially stamped paper, or pay an annual tax of $15,000. Every violation would incur a fine of $500 for the bank and $100 for the individual. After several notices from the state, bank cashier James McCulloch refused to pay the tax. McCulloch was sued for $110, which was the penalty for circulating unstamped banknotes. Obviously, Maryland won the case in its own state courts, but an appeal was sent to the United States Supreme Court. The case surrounded two questions. Pay attention. Did Congress have the constitutional authority to establish a national central bank? That's one. Did Congress have the constitutional authority to establish a national central bank? And second, did Maryland have the constitutional authority to impose a tax on the central bank? Okay. So now here we have, arguing on behalf of Maryland was their Attorney General, Luther Martin, and arguing for the central bank was Daniel Webster, who would later become the 14th and 19th Secretary of State for the United States. The two sides argued for 9 days on February 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th, 26th, 28th, March 1st, and March 2nd of 1819. Martin argues that Congress does not have the power to charter banks, and the Constitution does not specifically state that the states can excise a tax against the bank. I'll repeat that again. Martin argues that Congress does not have the power to charter banks, and the Constitution does not specifically state that states cannot excise a tax against the bank. It's very important argument. So here's his argument. He says, we insist that the only safe rule is the plain letter of the Constitution, the rule in the 10th Amendment that the powers not delegated to the United States nor prohibited to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. That's my horrible founding fathers accent. So I want to stop right here. Let me just make sure. No, let me continue. And then I'm going to show you something that really is just like bugging me and needs more research. And I need you guys to help me. OK, so obviously Martin citing the 10th Amendment, which says the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. In addition, he cites Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution, which I'll include here for context and convenience. So I'm actually going to read Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution. I'm going to read, it's 3 paragraphs, and I'm going to read it so everybody has it because it's relevant to what we're going to talk about. It says here, no state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, grant letters of marque, and reprisal, coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts, pass any bill of attainder, ex post facto law, or law impairing the obligation of contracts, or grant any title of nobility. That one's funny to me. So the one that's pertinent here is this paragraph here. So it says, no state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any imposts or duties on imports or exports, except what may be absolutely necessary for executing its inspection laws. And the net produce of all duties and imposts laid by any state on imports or exports shall be for the use of the Treasury of the United States. And all such laws shall be subjected to the revision and control of Congress. And the last part here says, no state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any duty of tonnage, keep troops or ships of war in time of peace, enter any agreement or compact with another state or a foreign power, or engage in war unless actually invaded or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay. Okay. So, clearly, Article 1, Section 10 does not state specifically that states cannot levy a tax against central banks. I'll repeat that again. Article 1, Section 10 does not state specifically that states cannot levy a tax against central banks. It mentions imports, exports, forbids them from creating a fiat currency, but it does not specifically forbode them from levying other kinds of taxes. In my opinion, Luther has an open and shut case. On the subject of whether or not Congress has the implied power to establish a central bank, Webster, Daniel Webster, cites the last paragraph of Article 1, Section 8, which states that Congress has the power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper. His argument continues. He says a bank is a proper and suitable instrument to assist the operations of government. So I'm going to stop right here because this is where I am confused. So this is Daniel Webster. Now, Daniel Webster is relevant because I did the previous presentation on the War of 1812. And Daniel Webster had something different to say. So here we'll see Daniel Webster in 1812. He's basically saying, in regards to a national bank, is a project calculated only for the benefit of the holders of the stock issued since the war. So he's basically saying the central bank only benefits the people who have speculated in the central bank, the stockholders, the private interests. That's what Daniel Webster said. Also, you'll see here, cited in this document, Daniel Webster suggested that the government should only accept specie or banknotes backed by specie for payment of debts and taxes after February 20th, 1817, but the powers that be decided otherwise. So previously in 1812, Mr. Daniel Webster seemed to be anti-central bank. But now, in 1819, Daniel Webster is making a different argument. And I'll tell you why I'm confused in a second, but we have to just provide some color around this guy, Daniel Webster, first. But you see here, he says, a bank is a proper and suitable instrument to assist the operations of government. That's a complete contradiction to what he said in 1812. All right, so let's give some context and just see who this guy Webster is. So here we have constitutioncenter.org, and it says Daniel Webster's unique Supreme Court legacy. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I just want to read the first part to show you who this guy was. It says here, Daniel Webster was one of the seminal figures of the 19th century America as an orator and politician. Perhaps less known is Webster's influence on the Supreme Court and especially the Marshall Court. Now, this is the part I want you to pay attention to. Born on January 18th, 1782 in New Hampshire, Webster was an attorney before joining Congress in 1813. During his nearly 30 years in government, Webster served as Secretary of State 3 times, twice in the Senate and twice in the House. Today, he's best remembered as the greatest public speaker of his time, a founder of the Whig Party, and for his controversial role in the 1850 compromise that led to fugitive slave laws and the Whig Party's death. So the part I just want you to pay attention to is the greatest public speaker of his time. So this guy is no slouch when it comes to arguing, when it comes to law, when it comes to being a lawyer. So now I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, wait a second. I have to gather my thoughts now. So this Daniel Webster guy in 1812 is saying central bank bad. In 1819, he's saying central bank good. So I said to myself, why would he switch? Now, there's several reasons that came to mind. One, he got compromised, right? He turned agent, got bought out, right? They cut him a couple of checks. They said, hey, Daniel, you're on our side now. He said, okay, cool. Let me start tap dancing. Or, right? So I always go conspiratorial theory, then I go practical theory, right? Because some people always stay here in the conspiratorial side, and often you might be wrong, but you also have to include what is real and what is plausible. So the real thing, I believe, is a possibility, is that maybe he's just a work for hire. Maybe he's just an attorney. And in 1812, people hired him to fight the central bank. And in 1819, they hired him to fight for the central bank. Maybe he was just a work for hire. Maybe he's just an attorney and he was doing his job. Attorneys technically have to be objective. That's also true. What if he's being objective in his case? Which is my third theory, was if we get a little bit more specific and granular, what if he never changed his mind, or he's not a work for hire in such a way that I purported it? What if he's just saying, look, the central banking is good, but in this specific case, do they have the authority to tax the bank, right? And also, because he was a witness and he saw the previous precedent set by the courts that said the central bank is cool, maybe as an attorney, you have to go based upon precedent, right? As a judge, you have to go based upon precedent. So maybe he's saying, well, because of the previous cases, here's what is law now. And because this is what is law now, I have to go by this law, potentially. So I toss it up in the air for you guys to do your homework and come back and you tell me what you think. Now, don't just think about it and say, hey, this is what I think. No, go do the research, pull your data together, and make a data-based decision. Okay, so let's come back. It's just a little segue for Daniel Webster. I just didn't understand the switch up there. So let's continue. On the second question of whether or not states have the right to levy taxes against the central bank, Webster argues, if the states may tax the bank, to what extent shall they tax it? And where shall they stop? His most infamous argument in the case was, an unlimited power to tax involves necessarily a power to destroy. He's basically saying if you can tax something, you can destroy it. So I got to stop right there. The power to tax means the power to destroy? That's a very compelling argument. Because you know what? I got to pay taxes. And I feel like I'm being destroyed, Daniel Webster. Where you at? Where you at? We need you. I'm ready to hire this guy right now. I can't argue with that line. The power to tax involves necessarily a power to destroy. I can't argue with that. I think that's a very great argument. Okay, continues. The Supreme Court came to a unanimous decision on March 6, 1819, ruling in favor of the central bank. John Marshall, the third Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, parroted Webster's argument when he said, the power to tax implies the power to destroy. So he liked it too. He said it verbatim. He like, yo, that's a bar right there. He was like, That's what Chief Justice John Marshall said. He's like, damn, that's a bar. If the states may tax one instrument, may they not tax every other instrument. This was not intended by the American people. Now, that's a very interesting argument, too. If you could tax one thing, can't you tax something else? It just feels like these guys are making this argument against 1913, if you know what I mean. I feel like we got a case we could build here, y'all. We can pull some of these quotes, walk into Congress and be like, hey, look, I need to talk to the Supreme Court. The power to tax is the power to destroy, quote, Secretary of State Daniel Webster. What can we do about this? We need to have a talk. Let's continue. On the first question, Chad said, HJ, let me do your voice acting work, bro. Somebody says that Jabari says the Negro peeing voice. Let's see. Okay. On the first question of whether or not Congress has the implied power to create a central bank, Marshall says a law passed by Congress is supreme within its sphere of action. Congress has the authority to pass all laws necessary and proper as implied in Article 1, Section 8. So now we have to dive into Article 1, Section 8. Wait, I think we already covered Article 1, Section 8. Yeah, we did. We did that. I'm sorry. Following the Supreme Court decision, Thomas Jefferson set up the Supreme Court justices, a subtle corps of sappers and miners constantly working underground to undermine the foundations of our constitutional fabric. Man. He said, Hotep Jesus sounds like the first Jamaican the British taught proper English. I'm going to tighten up my UK accent. Watch. Is it any coincidence that Chief Justice Marshall was an investor in the Second Bank of the United States? Apparently, he sold his stake just before the ruling in the case. Was this so he could not be exposed for conflict of interest? Fred Buzzio for Mises.org argues that this case is responsible for the incredible growth of federal authority. This ruling plainly laid the precedent that federal law was superior to state law. Darren A. Wisely argues that this decision is a complete abomination to the federal system the founders had set in place. A complete abomination to the federal system the founders had set in place. Andrew Jackson, I quote here, I was one of those who do not believe that a national bank is a national blessing, but rather a curse to a republic. Inasmuch, hold on, I got to do this in my accent. I was one of those who do not believe that a national bank is a national blessing, but rather a curse to our republic, inasmuch as it is calculated to raise around the administration a moneyed aristocracy dangerous to the liberties of the country. Quote, Andrew Jackson. Hopefully I'm not blowing y'all speakers out. How about that? How about that? This is 1819, y'all. 1819. What year was the United States formed? Somebody tell me what year the United States was formed. Like officially. I forget. I always forget this date. What was the official date that like it was ratified? Whatever. Anyway. Yeah, Andrew Jackson was definitely right. 1776? No, 1789. Thank you. 1789 is the correct year. It's not 1776. 1776, I think, was like the end of the Revolutionary War. 1789. Thank you. 1789. So several years after the foundation of the United States, we're already seeing a turn for the worse. Just a few years later, just a few decades later, it's already the idea. So, I always say, well, was that the plan all along? Was that the plan all along? I mean, Alexander Hamilton was there. He certainly was a big fan of the central bank. And I think in order to have the ability to install a central bank, don't you want to create some sort of centralization of power? Don't you want to create a federal government so the federal government can then give authority to foreign interest and private interest and speculators and money men to control the nation's money supply? I believe, or I speculate, I should say, that those are the plans all along to establish a new colony for the money men to create a new nation which would be under their control. Another nation which would be under control. But this nation is going to be different. This nation is going to be used to create a balance of power throughout the world. That's what this nation is going to do. The money men have taken over the 5 major countries of Europe at that time. If I remember correctly, that would be Great Britain, Italy, France, Austria, and Germany. Yeah, I think that would be the 5 world powers at that time. And then Russia, obviously, but Russia was not under the power of the money powers, at least not until the Russian Revolution. And the Russian Revolution, if this was 1819, the Russian Revolution was come about 80 to 90 years later. About 100 years later. Or less, about 90, let's just say 90 something odd years, the Russian Revolution would come about. And as we all know, the Russian Revolution was astroturfed by Wall Street money guys. Also in this book, which we'll talk about as well, was the money powers behind Germany in World War II. And we'll save that for a later date. He said, what about Holland? Yeah, I mean, Holland, I believe, may have had some power. I can't recall, but we're talking about like the top 5, right? Like the top 5 nations at that time. He said there was a central bank in England around 1692. Then we got 1776. Exactly. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? So that's what they were doing. They were like, I think the idea was, and I didn't create this idea. This came from Darryl Quigley, Tragedy and Hope, where he talks about, creating a balance of power. But I believe, branching off of his concept that United States was created as a new colony to be used as a colony to establish a balance of power between the nations. So you have the nations that are under the thumb of the bankers, and when one gets too big, we can have the United States step in and squash it when need be, and we've been seeing that for several years now. Shout out to Def Jules, said paying my tuition. Thank you for the super chat, bro. I truly appreciate the people who support this channel. You guys are the GOATs. And the rest of you people, you're grifters. Should nominate people who don't super chat for the grifty. Shout out to grifties.com. Greg P said, gotta show how this ties into the real origins of the Civil War. Cue suspenseful music. Oh, yeah. What chapter is that in here? Oh, yeah. That's 2 chapters away. That's 2 chapters away. So I'm working my way through to that. The next one will be the bank war, and then we'll talk about the Civil War. Good thing you brought that up. So I know this could hurt a lot of people's feelings. You know, they have these wonderful hopes and dreams that America was established to create freedom for people and such. But I believe that was an idea put into your mind by the money powers. Wesley Reynolds says, with the movie Woman King coming out, can you talk about the kingdom of Dahomey? I think they are going to be glorifying the cartel of the slave trade. Oh, you know about that too, huh? Steph Colonel, $2 super chat. Thank you. Oatmeal Joey Arnold, he said, and they were trying to create a central bank in America. I think 1812 was basically a rejection of that bank. Yeah, well, that's what this book details. It details all of the central banks in America, starting from the very first one, which is not the first one was called the Bank of North America, I believe. And then it was the first bank in the United States, the second bank of the United States, which is what we're covering in this series, the Patriot Report. And you guys can go ahead and feel free to purchase this book, the Patriot Report. Keep that on your bookshelves as a hot reference. Keep yourselves and your family educated. And also, the Patriot Report playlist here is a series of videos on this book to make sure people get this information. You know, some people don't have the time to read, can't read, whatever it may be, don't want to read. The font's too small in the book, whatever it may be. So this series here is going to allow people to, get the information. Thank you very much for watching today's presentation. I am
That Hotep Jesus dude.
And today is Tuesday, so I might do another stream later. I don't know. Maybe I'll do a late night stream. Y'all want me to do a late night stream? Hit one in the chat if you want me to do a late night stream. Anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here. Maybe I'll do one on the Woman King. Maybe I should just do a whole Hollywood. Later on, I'm gonna do a whole Hollywood stream. We're gonna talk about the Dahomey tribe. We're gonna talk about Little Mermaid, and we're gonna talk about something my handler Taylor brought up in regards to Hollywood actors and them pushing the agenda of the left. So yeah, I'll be back later. It's gonna be a lot of fun. Stick around, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you soon.